Hi everybody, I'm Charlotte Stirling-Reed and I'm here today at Zebedees headquarters. I'm really excited because I'm going to be delivering a webinar today all about salt and sugar in children's food. I'm going to cover everything you need to know about salt in their diets and sugar in their diets, and I'm also going to talk a lot about what Zebedees are doing to reduce levels of salt and sugars in their menus. So I really hope you enjoy it, and I hope that the webinar gives you all the information you need to know about this topic. Thank you again for joining us today. My name is Charlotte Stirling-Reed and I'm here with Al and Dawn from Zebedees, and they're going to be helping me with answering a lot of your questions, hopefully towards the end, that we've got about Zebedees, about the menus we have here, but hopefully a lot of your questions will also be answered as we go along. So we've got 45 minutes for the presentation today, and then we're going to do a 15-minute Q&A at the end where we're going to hopefully try and answer as many of your questions as we can. And of course, if any of you still got burning questions, you can always contact us at Zebedees. You know, we're always here to have a chat, to answer your questions and to support you in any way we can. So, you know, we'll be making sure that we give out the contact details at the end so you can do that. So, as I said, for those of you who've never met me, my name is Charlotte Stirling-Reed and I'm the baby and child nutritionist. And I've been working with Zebedees now for about 2 years. Supporting them with their menu development, but also doing things like this, so running webinars, writing blogs, developing recipes for them, all sorts of things that we've been doing in the background. We've been really busy. We've got so many ideas here at Zebedees, and they're just, fantastic organisation to work with. So thank you guys for having me. And I hope for those of you here who are from Zebedees nurseries, I really hope that you've been loving Zebedees food and that you're really enjoying being part of the team as well. So yeah, thank you. Anyway, to basically cover what we're talking about today, we're going to be talking about salt, sugar, and we're also going to cover how Zebedees menus are kind of going above and beyond to try and make sure that we're reducing and having minimal levels of salt and sugar in children's food. But we thought that what was really important was for us to cover what is it about salt and sugar that matters. It's always in the press, and we'll talk about that a little bit, but it's always in the press. People are always talking about it, and what I wanted to do in this session is really hone in on why. Why does it matter? Why do we need to know about it? And what should we be doing when it comes to salt and sugar in young children's diets? So, just to go over with you what we're going to cover today, we're going to be covering salt, recommendations, why it's restricted. We're also going to be doing the same for sugar, so we'll go over both of those in a lot of detail. And then, like I said, at the very end, we'll be talking about Zebedees and how they are managing to keep their levels of sugar and salt in their foods low. And hopefully that will help to reassure you guys, but also maybe give you some ideas and inspiration yourselves too. So, without further ado, we're going to kick off and talk a little bit about salt. Now, I've worked as a nutritionist for a long time, and salt, as well as sugar, is one of the most important topics when it comes to young children's health. It's a bit of a funny thing to talk about at the moment because there's a bit of questions and there's a bit of controversy around whether salt actually is a problem in children's diets. And the reason for that is because do we know whether actually if children eat high amounts of salt, does that have an impact on them there and then? We don't really know, and actually there's no research that's going to test that by giving children high amounts of salt. However, what we do know is that offering children's diets that are high in salt is likely to encourage a preference for salty foods, because children, when they're very young, they're developing preferences. And if they have lots and lots of salty foods in their diet, it is more likely that as they get older, they are going to be wanting more and more salt to kind of fill that taste preference. So it's really important that we try not to create taste preferences towards salt. And there's lots of things you can do to help, stop that happening, which I'll cover in a little bit. But the other thing we do know from lots and lots of research is that in adults and in the long term, high intakes of salt can have a knock-on effect in certain people, and it can increase the risk of things like high blood pressure, in cardiovascular disease, stroke, coronary heart attack. And we know that those are some of the biggest killers in the UK. So it's really important that we're not developing a preference for salty foods in young children, and we're helping them to have healthy diets that aren't having huge amounts of salt in them because of these factors. So really, that's why we need to make sure we are limiting salt in their diet, and it's so key to try and do that. When it comes to recommendations, I'm just going to jump onto this one quickly. When it comes to recommendations, it actually varies depending on children's ages, and of course this is because smaller bodies, smaller kidneys, smaller mechanisms for coping with high levels of salt. So the recommendations in the UK are that children between 0 and 6 months have less than 1 gram of salt. 6 to 12 months should have, again, 1 gram of salt is an absolute maximum. From 1 to 3 years, that goes up to 2 grams, then 4 to 6, 3 grams, and then 7 to 10, it's 5. And when you become an adult, it's about 6 grams of salt. And that is the maximum. That's not what we're aiming for. That's the maximum that children and adults should be having a day, is 6 grams. So under that, when we're talking about the early years, so really we're looking at between about 1 and 3 grams of salt a day. And that is less than a teaspoon of salt. So if you have a look at this visual that you can see here, you can see the very, very small one is 1 gram. And then the very, very large one is 6 grams. And the one in the middle is about 3 grams of salt. So you can see how that varies hugely depending on the age group. And 1 teaspoon is roughly about 4 grams. So you can see how small that is. And if we're adding a pinch here and a pinch there to foods, then that's going to add up to quite a lot. However, hopefully most of us aren't actually adding salt to children's foods, because the recommendation is not to add salt. One of the reasons for that, and one of the reasons why this is so important, is because there are so many foods that are already high in salt as it is. And some of these foods will be foods that actually young children are having. So what we know is that actually around 75% of the salt that we as a population have is already added to our food. So there's only about 25% of salt, our salt intakes, is that we are adding ourselves. The rest of it's already been added. So 75% of the salt that we are consuming is already in foods. And that's why you do have to be really careful when we are feeding children and make sure that we are not adding salt into their diets. They really don't need it. There's absolutely no reason to be adding salt to young children's food. So here are some of the foods that are highest in salt, and some of these children might be having. So for example, sauces like pasta sauces, pesto, tomato sauces, ketchup, all of those kind of foods are actually often quite high in salt. Also things like, I've already mentioned ketchup, but things that people often don't know about, things like mayonnaise is actually very, very high in salt. Salad dressings can be really high in salt. Hummus as well, another firm favourite for a lot of children. Short pot hummus can again be very high in salt. Cheese is a product that is naturally high in salt. It's very nutrient-rich food, so we normally recommend that you can obviously give children cheese, but just try and use small amounts. Grate it so it goes a little bit further. There's lots of things you can do to try and reduce the amount of salt they're having overall. Bread is also quite high in salt, but actually in the UK we've had lots of campaigns and there's actually been a really big reduction in salt added in bread. So we're doing really well on the salt front. Some breakfast cereals as well are a really big source of salt. Stock cubes, olives, also smoked foods like smoked salmon, for example, processed meat, ready meals, and foods like fish that are tinned in brine. Now, I'm not saying that these are foods that all children will be eating, but some of these might be some of the foods that you are offering to young children. And that's why it's really important just to be really careful about that, because as I said, we don't want to be adding salt to children's foods, but actually a lot of salt is already in the foods that children might be eating. So in order to try and combat that, there's lots of things that you can do. Ultimately, as I've already said, do try and avoid adding salt to baby and children's foods whilst you're cooking and once it's prepared. There just is no need. They don't need it, and I know sometimes it can help with texture and other things in food, but for young children, they don't necessarily need that salt added at all. Check labels on products where you can. Look for amounts of salt in those products. So for example, if you're looking at a product per 100 grams, you can tell what percentage of that product is salt. And normally it's quite a small amount. But also often on labels, it will tell you how much there is per portion. So you can see how much salt is in a product per portion. And that can help you to see how much salt your little one is going to get, or young children are going to get from that. Check with catering companies that you use. So if you're using catering companies, or if you're using chefs to create food for your nurseries and for your children, it's really, really worthwhile asking them what their stance on salt is. Are they adding salt to any foods? Or, you know, again, chefs in the kitchen, are they just very naturally adding salt when they're cooking the pasta, for example? Because there's lots of ways, again, that you can reduce the amount. So what can we do instead? Well, actually, one of the best things I think about salt is that actually we develop preference for it, like I've already mentioned. So actually for young children who are not used to having salt in their diet. They're not going to miss it. You only miss it once you've really had it. But there are so many other ways that you can make foods really flavourful without adding salt. So for example, herbs and spices. Herbs and spices are brilliant to add to little children's food. And just to show you here, here's just some of the ones that you could be using. So for example, herbs, basil and thyme and parsley, rosemary. These are all really good options for adding lots of flavour into children's diet. You don't often need to add much. You can add small amounts. Sage, really strong flavour. Mint is a really great way of flavouring lots of foods. And also I'm a massive fan of garlic powder. It can again add plenty of flavour. And then when it comes to spices, again, so many options that you can use. And a lot of these, so for example, things like cinnamon and nutmeg, they help to add sweetness to dishes. So they actually bring out a lot of the other flavours in the meals. But ginger, paprika, cumin, these are all great flavours that you can absolutely add to young children's diet. Even from the start of weaning, it's absolutely fine adding small amounts of these into their foods. And as I said, it can be really, really great ways to flavour foods. And it's a lot of the work that Zebedees does here is looking into how we can flavour foods much more naturally. Fruits and vegetables as well. I mean, we have such a variety of fruit and vegetables at our disposal, and there are so many different flavours that come with those. Lemon juice, really wonderful for adding flavour to things, but often things like sweet potato and carrot and apples and bananas are really, really great to add sweetness and flavour to foods too. So a really good idea is to try and flavour foods with those. Cookbooks for inspiration. I mean, I often take recipes that I have found in books or online, and I will literally just cut out the sugar and cut out the salt, and they still taste great. So use those for inspiration and just think about how you can edit that so that they're much more suitable for young children. Plenty of variety is also key, because let's be honest, children are going to have some of these foods. Children are going to have ketchups and sauces and some, smoked salmon or a ready meal every now and then. And that's absolutely fine. It really isn't a problem as long as we're offering plenty of variety to young children in their diets. That is what is really, really key. Making meals at home can make a big difference as well. So for those of you, if you're creating meals for children, if you could be making things yourselves, or obviously tapping into a company like Zebedees who don't add salt and sugar to their food, it can make a really big difference. It can really help to reduce those levels of salt and sugar in the food. And choose catering companies, as I already kind of mentioned, who flavour food and who experiment and who trial those dishes without adding salt and sugar. There are so many ways you can bake delicious foods without the need for it, and Zebedees help to prove that. So I've mentioned about the herbs and spices, which is such a great idea. So when it comes to reading labels, I've already talked about this a little bit, but one thing that is really good to do is, as I said, check the 100-gram column on the back of packets. It helps you to see what percentage of the product is salt. Most products are going to be really, really small amount because, as I said, it's only about 6 grams that is the maximum for an adult. So most products will have quite small amounts of salt in them. But when you look at the portion, it's important to think, if a portion, for example, is for 20 grams, in a 20-gram portion, it's important to think, would this child be eating 20 grams, or will they double or triple that, or will they be eating a smaller amount than that? And then you can actually see how much salt they're getting in just that one portion of food. So when you're looking at products, something that can be really helpful is knowing what is low and what is high when it comes to salt. So low salt products tend to have less than 0.3 grams of salt per 100 grams. So you might want to write this down because it's a really, really, really useful way of having a look at the back of the pack and being able to tell whether that product is high in salt or low in salt. So when you pick up things like cheese in the supermarket, or when you pick up sauces or condiments, and or ready meals, which is a really good option, and when you have a look at the back of the pack, if you're finding that actually quite a lot of them are having salt intakes that are 1.5 grams and over per 100 grams, that means that is very high in salt. And these are products that we really should be avoiding or really limiting in young children's diet. Those that have got 0.3 grams of salt and under per 100 grams are ones that are absolutely fine to be giving to children. They're low salt products and they're fine for us to be giving to children fairly regularly. So as I said, these two are really key numbers, especially if you're cooking, prepping, shopping and buying foods for young children and for children in nurseries. It's really, really important to know these numbers and know what to look out for on the back of packs. So I hope that helps. We'll definitely answer lots of questions if you've got anything on salt at the end. But I think just to really quickly summarise what I've talked about today, we don't know a lot about salt and its impact on young children. But what we do know is that we need to be reducing preferences for those foods to help improve, the palate of children so they don't need super salty foods. We know that the amount of salt that children should have is very, very small. And there are lots of ways that we can reduce salt in children's diet. But mainly we need to check packets of labels and not be adding salt ourselves. Lots of herbs and spices, using fruits and vegetables, using lots of other flavours in the diet can really help. And as I said, also choosing a catering company to provide food for children who do not need to use salt and sugar in their foods. And then last but not least, just checking out labels and making sure you're choosing more products that are low salt and much less in the way of products that are high salt products. So I hope that kind of helps to summarise what we talked about. I'm going to move on to an even more complex topic now, which is about sugar. So sugar is much more complicated because people don't really understand it, and there's a lot of different types of sugar as well, which can add to the complexity. Sugar on its own doesn't provide any benefits to children. So when we're talking about sugar, the kind of foods you can see here, the pure table sugar, it doesn't offer any benefits to young children. It does offer calories, but it doesn't actually offer any nutritional benefits. So no vitamins or minerals or antioxidants that come with it. The problem with sugar mainly comes because young children can quite easily fill up on sugar and it can displace other foods in the diet. So young children, for those of you who were on the last webinar I run, you probably heard me talk a lot about children having small tummies and quite small appetites, but actually very high needs for nutrients and energy and protein and calories. So they have small appetites, small stomachs, but they need lots and lots of nutrients in their diet. If they are filling up on lots of sugary foods, so cakes and biscuits and sweets and chocolate, they're actually going to be displacing some of the other really important foods in their diet that they need a lot more of. So the vitamin C, the vitamin A, the iron, the omega-3, the zinc, all of those things that we know they need lots of. Additionally, high intake of sugary foods. Let's be honest, sugar is very, very palatable. And sweets are made because they taste good. And children and adults, we're all born with a preference for sweeter foods. And most of us tend to have a real, enjoyment of eating very sweet food. It hits the taste buds and boom, straight away we feel it, we like it. And that's why these foods are created, because they are very palatable. We enjoy the taste of them as humans. In nature, sugar often comes in foods like berries and fruits and vegetables that actually contain a wealth of nutrients. However, now we've kind of taken that power of sugar and we've put it into lots of foods that actually don't provide much in the way of nutritional benefits. So we still have that desire for those foods that actually in nature come along with lots of nutrients, but we're now desiring foods that come along with lots of sugar without the nutrients. And this is where we get a problem. High intakes of sugar can lead to increased intakes of food, which actually can lead to increased intakes of calories. And over the long run, that's not a good idea, especially for young children. And also we know a lot about excess sugar causes damage to the teeth, especially, foods you can see here, like these kind of chewy sweets and chewing sweets and having sugar that lasts on the teeth is actually likely to encourage the growth of bacteria and encourage dental problems as well. And we see this quite commonly in young children. Lots of children under the age of 5 having teeth extracted due to their teeth becoming decayed because of their high intakes of sugar. So certain types of sugar have, as I said, resulted in excess calories. And there is a real big problem with actually sugary drinks and sugar sweetened beverages, which we'll probably talk about later, but that's one of the biggest concerns in the UK. So having said all of that, having given you all the scary information, I just want to talk about one thing because I think it's really important to address this. In the news, when we read about sugar, when we hear about sugar, we always hear this really scaremongering information. Sugar is addictive, it's like cocaine, it's toxic, it damages your brain. There actually is no evidence for any of this. There is no evidence. So if you ever read those really scaremongering stories, you need to just take them with a pinch of sugar because literally they are there to scare you. They're there as clickbait for you to read those articles, but there really isn't a lot of truth behind it. So we need to be very, very careful with what we're reading, what we're sharing, and what messages we're spreading. We know, as I said already, that sugar can lead to excess weight if it's consumed in excess. We know that it can damage dental health, and we know that it can displace other foods in the diet, which are really important for children to have. These are the problems. There is no evidence that it is addictive, that it causes cancer, that it causes, it's toxic to the body. actually there is no evidence for all of this. So as I said, take that with a bit of a pinch of salt. So what should young children be eating? Well, it's actually a bit complicated because in the UK, we have very specific recommendations for adults. And adults should have no more than about 5% of their calories coming from free sugars in the diet, which I'll explain in a little bit. But no more than about 5% of their calories should be based on free sugar and sugar in the diet. That's quite a small amount. However, for young children, so children under 4, so a lot of the children that you guys will be serving, actually there isn't a specific recommendation. There isn't a recommendation for them to have X amount a day and no more. But what we do say, and what the government say, is it's best to avoid giving sugar and foods and drinks that contain sugar to young children. And that's a lot because of this preference development. We know in those early years children are developing preferences. If they're having lots of sugar, sugary drinks, sugar, cakes and biscuits, of course they're going to want more of them. And as they get older and more independent, they're more likely to want more of those foods too. So it's best to try and avoid. And that's again why, working with Zebedees, it gives me a lot of confidence because they actually try so hard, with baking their recipes to make them taste good without that added sugar and salt. And I think that's really, really key for children who are very young. And actually, it's not really easy most of the time to be not offering young children any sugar at all, but it's just about keeping that to an absolute minimum. So I want to just go a little bit into information about sugar and what sugar actually is, because I think a lot of people are very confused about this. So sugar in its very, very basic form is called a monosaccharide. Mono means one. So just one molecule of sugar makes up something like glucose, fructose, or galactose. You can see there's 2 sugar molecules joined together here. This one of these molecules is sugar. And if it is joined together with another molecule, it becomes a disaccharide. And a disaccharide is something like sucrose, so that's the table sugar that we pour onto cereal or we pour into our tea. Lactose, which is sugar that is naturally found in milk. And maltose, which is a type of sugar, again, that's sometimes in things like malt extract. So these are the types of sugar we see in the diet. You can have monosaccharides, single units of sugar, or disaccharides, where they are double units of sugar put together or naturally coming together. Then after that, you have something called polysaccharides, and that really is where you've got long chains of sugars. Now, when you have long chains of sugars together, they no longer are sugars as we know them. They become starches. So in things like potatoes and in things like pasta and rice, you will have polysaccharides, long chains of sugars all joined together. But the body has to work really hard to break these down into individual sugars, which are then used in the body. So these really aren't what we are worried about. What we're worried about is the excess intake and the high consumption of these single and double sugar molecules, because they are what has an impact on the teeth. They are very easily broken down. They can lead to high spikes of blood sugar in the body. And as we said, they're really easy to eat and easy to consume. They're very sweet. They are palatable. So these are the things that we are worried about, that we want to be reducing. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit more about that now, because I know people find this added sugar and natural sugars very confusing. So what are free sugars, which is what the government like to call them, or added sugars? These are all sugars in whatever form. So these very basic molecules that I mentioned here, so the mono and disaccharides, and these are added sugars. So if you've got things like honey and syrups that have been added to foods, they count as free and added sugars. Also, lactose and galactose. So lactose is the sugar that is found in milk. It's what makes milk a little bit sweet, but it's found naturally. So milk is not a problem, because actually the lactose found in that is bound within the structure of protein and everything else in the milk. However, when you take that lactose out of milk or dry it and make and add it into foods on its own, it then becomes an added sugar. Okay, so we want to be reducing things like honey, syrups, maple syrup, agave syrup, all of those that are often, touted as the kind of healthier options. They are still sugar, just in a different form. Lactose, galactose if they're added to food, and all sugars that are naturally present in fruit when consumed in the form of a juice also count towards added sugar intake. So we do need to be a little bit careful with the intakes of those in the diet. Now, sugars that occur naturally, those are ones that are found very naturally in dairy products, so as lactose, as I said. Sugars that are found in fresh fruits and vegetables, ones that aren't generally that aren't processed, that are found naturally. So they're not blended, they're not turned into something else, they're not added into a food to sweeten it. Sugar's also naturally present in most types of cereals and grains. So again, I mentioned about those sugars are more polysaccharides, so they're kind of long chains of sugars, which aren't the problem. And all sugars that are naturally present in nuts and seeds. So these are sugars that we don't need to worry so much about. The ones we do need to worry about are those that are added to food. So they're added to foods in whatever form. Those are the ones that we need to be a little bit wary of. So, a little bit more about reading labels. I mentioned about salt and what to look out for on the label, and there's a bit more of a gradient when it comes to sugars. And again, with young children, we really want to be focusing on those low amounts of sugar, those foods that are low in sugar. Medium, okay, but ideally trying to avoid foods that are high in. And I have to point out there are a lot of things like breakfast cereals and drinks that are produced for young children that actually have high levels of sugar in them that we really need to be reducing. So we want to be aiming mainly for low and then some medium. So low sugar means less than 5 grams per 100 grams in foods. And in drinks, it's less than 2.5 grams per 100 ml. So we want to be looking for those low ones. And as I said, it's a bit of a spectrum and there's a big jump between the kind of low and the high levels. But we really do want to be making sure that when we're choosing foods for young children, we're avoiding those high levels of sugars. So when you're looking at labels as well, I think this is really important to point out because people often don't really realise, but actually when you look at the back of a pack and you look at the nutrition panel, you'll have carbohydrate written on there, and carbohydrate of which sugars is what you want to look out for. Now this does include both natural and added sugars, but that gives you a little bit of an indication of how much sugar is in that pack per portion or per 100 gram. So again, if you were looking at it per 100 gram, you could see this is 4.6, which means that if we look here, it's actually under 5 grams. So it still would count as a low sugar food. So I hope that makes sense. I know this is quite a lot, but you absolutely will get these slides and can have a look back at them. But do check the back of the pack. It can really help to show how much sugar is in those foods. And I think it's really important as well to point out that in foods, that sugar can be labelled in so many ways. So honey, brown sugar. I've seen a lot of things listed as things like coconut syrup, which is just sugar. Molasses, treacle, nectars, agave syrup. Ingredients that often end in O's, so dextrose, fructose, sucrose. These are all sugars that are being added to foods to make them sweet. And those are the ones that we want to be a little bit careful of. Also in America, they use lots of high fructose corn syrup. It's not something we use so much in here, but there are products that do contain corn syrup in them. And often fruit juice concentrates are used in a lot of young children's foods. And these are often used to almost slightly disguise the fact that they are adding sugar for sweetness. So these are the ingredients that we want to be mindful of. I'm not saying children have to avoid them, but just know that these are all labels for sugar in children's diets and adults' diets. So it's all very well telling us what not to do, but what can we do? How can we reduce the amount of sugar in young children's diets? So first of all, as with salt, it's best to avoid adding sugar in the first place. If you can avoid adding sugar, there are going to be lots of foods that young children eat that contain sugar. So we've already mentioned things like breakfast cereals. We've already mentioned things like, jams and sauces. Often things like pasta sauces often contain, I'm just going to jump back to, oh no, I haven't done it, sorry. So often things like bread contains added sugar, sauces, breakfast cereals, standard pasta sauces. There's often sugar in lots of things that we actually wouldn't expect. So it's worthwhile keeping an eye out. It's worthwhile having a look at the ingredients and reading the back of the pack and seeing if any of these are actually added into those foods that you're offering to young children. Because sometimes it can be quite surprising. So lots of foods they already have will have sugar, and that's not even just, we're not even talking about the cakes and the biscuits and the sweets, which we know have sugar in them, but things like yogurts as well often contain quite a lot. Choose products that are lower in sugar, so ones that have less than 5 grams per 100 grams of the product. So lower in sugar, and try to avoid added sugars and foods that are high in sugar where possible. Check labels, so the ingredients list on the back of the pack is listed in order of size. So the first ingredient, let's say in a breakfast cereal, is likely to be something like wheat. And if the next ingredient is sugar, it means it's pretty high up in the product. So the ingredients list is listed in order of size, so it's really important to have a look at that. Again, I've already said, but if you're serving food to lots of children, try and choose catering companies who are aware, who are mindful about sugar, who are trying to reduce the levels in food. It can be really, really challenging to get the balance between texture and mouthfeel and taste and palatability when you're trying to reduce levels of sugar. But, you know, Zebedees do a really, really great job of doing that, of reducing the sugar in their food, of trying to make sure we're using less in the way of added sugars and trying to use more things like chopped fruits and chopped vegetables to make their food really palatable, but all the while not having really high amounts of sugar added. So choose catering companies who are essentially responsible, who care, who are trying to make a difference. And I think that's really important. Fruits and vegetables, again, can be used to sweeten foods really easily. So, of course, you can chop them, you can blend them, but again, blending them is, you know, breaking down that sugar again and making it a bit more readily available. But you know, for example, fruits and vegetables can really easily be chopped up nice and small and added to bakes and cakes to add that sweetness to them. And as I mentioned when I was talking about the herbs and spices, things like cinnamon and nutmeg and other herbs and flavours can actually be used to draw sweetness out of food too. So if you're able to work with a really good chef like we've got here at Zebedees, they can have a look at that. They can see what things can be added to help improve the kind of, you know, the taste and the palatability of those foods. So also, I've already mentioned this, but try and stick to things like plain yogurts, plain milks, non-flavoured cereals, and try and add sweetness yourself if you need to. So for example, quite often, some things that young children have are yogurts. And sometimes fruity flavoured or sweet yogurts can be really popular with young children, but actually adding fruit yourself, whether that be in chunks, as whole fruit, as dried fruit stirred up into the puree, into the yogurt, or making a puree yourself can be really great ways of adding sweetness to that yogurt without it needing added sugar. So, I'm nearly finished now. I'm just going to talk very, very briefly about Zebedees menus. I know some of you guys might have questions on salt and sugar, and I know this was a very whistle-stop tour through, so I've talked very quickly about salt and sugar in food, but hopefully it's helped you to understand, and I've got some blogs and articles that I can share to give you a little bit more information and allow you to kind of sit down and take that information in. So for example, I've got blogs on salt and sugar and label reading that might be really useful for you to take away and share with colleagues or just have another kind of thought about it. But what I wanted to do now is talk a little bit about what Zebedees do in their menus, because one of the things that I was actually really blown away when I started working with Zebedees was the amount, first of all, that they knew about nutrition and about young children and about trying to improve young children's health. But also, I think the other thing that really surprised me was how much Brendan, who is the head chef, really tries to improve those menus. So he was very aware of not wanting to add high levels of sugar and salt. And we know that in young children's diet, salt and sugar is not recommended to be added. So he had a really big task at making food that was palatable for everybody. So for children from different backgrounds who are used to completely different diets, making palatable food that contained fruits and vegetables and plenty of goodness, but at the same time was low in salt and sugar. And it was a challenge. But I'm just going to talk a little bit about developing menus. So I've already kind of mentioned this as we've gone along, but just to add to this. So, you know, we said about avoiding adding salt and sugar in foods generally, and I think it's really important to know there are so many foods out there that children are going to eat that are going to contain salt and sugar. So adding it into the foods that we make them is really not ideal. And again, for a company like Zebedees, who are really trying to go above and beyond and be the best, they don't want to be adding sugar and salt into their meals because children are going to be getting that enough elsewhere. We want to make sure that these meals are nutritious and very, very low in salt and sugar. Also, you can do things like offering whole fruits where possible. So rather than blending up fruits and offering purees, even with young babies and children who are kind of going through the weaning journey, it's a good idea to try and offer whole pieces of fruit to them. You can chop them, you can grate them, you can offer them in different ways, but ideally try and offer them in pieces rather than always offering blended fruits. As I've already mentioned, herbs and spices, these can be used in so many beneficial ways to add flavours and taste to food. For lunch today at Zebedees, we had their curry. We also had some sweets. We had some coconut sponge cake that, again, was sweetened without added sugar. Lots of ways you can flavour food. Coconut, lemon, lime, oils you can use as well as using dried fruit, herbs and spices, so many different things. Try and avoid adding condiments or make your own where you can. Another thing that always surprised me so much about Zebedees was how they make their own everything. So when it comes to something like baked beans that they could quite easily make themselves, they actually were, that you could quite easily just use from a tin. They're making it themselves. They're making it from scratch, and they're making sure that they're not adding salt and sugar, but still making it taste delicious. Opt for plain yogurts wherever you can. So if you can give children yogurts that are plain, that don't contain added fruit, then that's brilliant. But otherwise, using things like fruit compotes or dried chopped fruit to add to those yogurts where possible is a good idea. Try and think as well about the balance of foods that your little ones are eating across the day, because it doesn't really matter what they're having at one meal on one occasion. If a child goes out with their family, say for example, and they have ice cream and pudding and all sorts in one day, it doesn't actually matter. It's what children are having over the long term that matters. And again, that's one of the main reasons why I was so keen to work with Zebedees, because they are having an impact on so many children for so many meals throughout so many weeks and months of the year. It's not about what happens on one day or one occasion. It is about what's happening the majority of the time. And we want to think about the balance of foods that children are getting, not just at dinner or not just at lunch, but again, with Zebedees, we work across the menus for the whole day. What's happening for lunch, tea, snack, what's going on at all of these meals, and trying to build menus that help to improve nutrition intakes throughout the whole day. If you are a nursery setting who offers breakfast as well, it's really, really key to have a look at the breakfast cereals that you're offering. This is one of the things that I often find with nurseries that I work with, is they are often using cereals that are quite high in sugar and salt. And there are so many cereals available. There are plenty of options that are low or at least medium in salt and sugar. So check on the breakfast cereals that you're offering at the moment and see if you can swap and offer lower sugar and lower salt ones. Also check labels, and I've already talked a little bit about that, but trying to choose ones that are low in salt and contain less than 5 grams of sugar per 100 grams will really help to lower the children's sugar and salt intakes overall. And as we said, there's so many ways. Puddings at nursery are often a really important option to make sure that children are getting enough calories throughout the day, especially if they're not necessarily eating every single meal that's offered. So puddings can really help, but there are so many ways to make them sweet and palatable without adding sugar. So fruits can be a really, really great way. And basing puddings on fruit or dairy is a really great option to try and make sure they are healthy and offering plenty of nutritious options to young children. So, last but not least, what are Zebedees actually doing? And again, I know I've sung their praises quite a lot, and you guys are going to pop on in a minute as well and talk a lot about what Zebedees are doing and answer some of your questions. But I genuinely was blown away by how brilliant Zebedees were when it came to working out these menus. So I asked lots of questions to the chef about what they're actually currently doing. They don't add sugar. They use fruits to sweeten. And quite a lot of the time, that is fruits that are just chopped. So you can often see chopped bits of fruits that are added into their food. Check products. They check every single product and item that comes in. They're checking for salt, sugar. They're using low salt and sugar products if they need to make them in baking or things like that. And what they often do is use bulk the food out with things like extra flour or extra other ingredients that mean they don't have to use added sugar. They use fruit and veg to flavour and add lots of variety. So if you look across the Zebedees menus, you probably won't see the variety of veg that they use because not every single ingredient is listed. But if you look at their products and you study them, you can actually see little flecks of vegetables that are being used in cakes and bakes and pastries as well. So really fantastic. They never add salt to any of their meals for children, and they use lots of other methods like herbs and spices to flavour those meals instead. They're always incredibly vigilant. They're always adapting. They look at the guidelines that the government set us, and they go above and beyond them. So they make sure they are always on, keeping an eye out on the news, what people are saying, what parents are wanting, what nurseries are wanting, but also what the government is saying. So if they're bringing out new guidelines or if they're bringing out new suggestions for what children's food should look like, we're adapting all the time to make sure that is happening. Also, Zebedees, one of the things I found fascinating about them is they work so closely with the people who supply different parts of their ingredients with them. They work with them, they ask questions, they go back to them, they ask for change, they try to get adaptations if and when it's necessary. And over the last 2 years, Zebedees has been doing that hugely. Between myself and the chef, we've been working with a lot of manufacturers to try and make sure we're improving all of the ingredients that we're adding into children's foods. All meals are made here from scratch at the beginning of the day. Those meals are then filtered out across the UK, sent out in our big Zebedees vans, which take that food up and deliver it nice and hot to wherever you are, to make sure that children get a nice, hot, freshly cooked meal every single day. And I think that's pretty incredible because there's a lot of meals going out from Zebedees. As I said, they check ingredients. They only use ingredients that is essential. They're not using fillers or things that are not needed. They're using essential foods only. And they do so much recipe testing. And that was, again, one of the things I absolutely love about coming to Zebedees is we get to taste test. So today we had scones and we had cakes and we had flapjacks and we had rice and curry. And we taste test everything that goes out. The staff eat the food, and before it's even written up onto the menu, we've tasted it, we've tried it, we've made sure that we approve it too. So basically that is a lot of what Zebedees are doing, and I just wanted to highlight that because I think that is really important for you guys to know. So salt and sugar is not a problem with Zebedees menus. We've taken care of it, but hopefully today you've learned a lot about what can be done when it comes to salt and sugar in children's food very generally. So yeah, I hope that was helpful. Really brief summary before we move on to ask your questions. So as I said, so much food that is already available contains lots of salt and sugar. Many of these foods children have day to day, but we need to be reducing and keeping that as low as possible. It's ideal to keep them low. It's ideal to check labels to make sure that you can see what's high and what's low in salt and sugar. Kids' meals, we do not need to be adding salt and sugar to them. They just don't need it. And there's lots of ways that we can flavour those foods without them. Avoid offering young children cakes and biscuits, which have got lots of added sugars. And where possible, try and use foods that don't add salt and sugar to their diet. Avoid juices and smoothies for young children if you can. It's really important to look after children's teeth. Milk and water are the most tooth-friendly things that you can offer. And lastly, have a look at those breakfast cereals. Just some of the tips and some of the things that I have covered today. So I hope that was really helpful. Thank you guys so much for listening. I know it's a lot of information to take on because salt and sugar are two huge topics, but hopefully you got a really good gist of what you need to do and some tips to take away and implement in your settings. So I hope that was really helpful. Thank you.
That's great.
Thank you. So what we're going to do now is move on to the question and answer section. Okay, so we've got a question here. You use processed meat on menus such as sausages. Do these contain added salt? Does anyone want to?
Yep. So we have a special company that make a specific recipe for us, which is very, very low in salt. We've used them for a number of years. They're fantastic sausage, and they work really well for us. As a setting, and obviously that's steamed with our homemade baked beans, so there's no added salt in any of the beans, and that alongside the mashed potato as well. So it's a very good, healthy, hearty meal.
And I think the good thing about you working closely with the suppliers like that is that you can have a say in what they look like and what they're using, and in the salt levels. So I think that's key, isn't it? Which is really good. Thanks for the presentation. You mentioned plain yoghurt, but I believe they are sweetened with stevia. Shouldn't we avoid sweet taste even if it's not white fine sugar? So yeah, this is a really good question, and it's something that at Zebedees we've been working really, really hard on behind the scenes. So children are often quite used to having yogurts that do contain flavours in them. We do have a variety of different yogurts. So there are some Zebedees branded yogurts which contain only fruit purees and not stevia. And those are going to be much, much, much less sweet. At the moment, we're working with a supplier of yogurts who supplies the ones that are flavoured with stevia, and we're trying to make some changes there at the moment. So that is something we're working very, very closely on at the moment. That's a really good question. And yeah, it's absolutely something that has not gone amiss. We're working really closely, but it's very difficult. It's been a bit of a challenging time with Brexit, COVID, war. I mean, everything going on. There's been a huge issue with supply. So we are, I promise you, this is something we're working on. The only thing we have to add to that is that it is really difficult. We don't want to be offering children food that they are not going to eat. So we have to balance up that. What are they used to? What do they have at home? But as I said, the Zebedees products, the Zebedees yogurts that are offered are all just fruit puree. So it is not, it's not sweeteners and it's not added sugar. It is fruit purees that are used in those.
And then we also have a natural yogurt as well that's teamed off with fruit and natural juice. So and also we used to use granola, muesli, again with no added sugar, just to try and sort of sweeten it naturally.
Yeah, and there are lots of other ways, but as I said, we're very much working on that, so that is in progress and in development, but great question. So another one here, I can see you have bakes and sponges on your menus. Oh, I'm not sure if that's a question, but yes, we have bakes and sponges on the menus, but as I said in the kind of last slide, what Zebedees do with those is it's fantastic. They grate lots of veg into it.
Yep.
They use fruit. They use things like chopped dried fruits to sweeten it. Orange to flavour it, and it's quite remarkable the amount of testing, experimenting.
Butternut, sweet potato.
Oh yeah, butternut,
lots of sort of fruit
coconut,
and veg.
Yeah, lots of ways that they do it. So they do a brilliant job. That's what I was kind of shouting out about in that last slide. Thanks for the presentation. Packet snacks such as veggie sticks, fruit bites, are they high in sugar and salt? So that's a really good question. Most of the time, no. Most of the time, the ones that are offered for young children do not contain added sugars and added salt. But it does depend what you define as that, because there are quite a lot of things like fruity strips, that are literally like jelly fruit. And to be honest, that's going to be fruit that is so processed down, very chewy, actually very disruptive for the teeth. The other thing with these kind of snacks, so the veggie sticks and the kind of packages of little crisps and things like that, the sugary fruit bites, first of all, yes, they are going to still be very sweet on the teeth, because what they've done is they've taken a piece of fruit and they have blended it and literally taken it down to its finest little parts, and then they've kind of processed it into some sort of jelly sweet or sucky sweet or something, and actually they are still not going to be great for the teeth in that level. And the other problem with these kind of snacks is that actually quite often they are very they don't contain many nutrients at all. So they contain calories, so children get calories from them, but they're not filling them up with things like fibre and vitamins and minerals, which is what children need. So I'm not saying that we need to avoid them. They are fine to offer, but I would say they are fine to offer on occasion, because young children need high intakes of nutrients. And if they are using packets of crisps and fruity sticks and whatever else is kind of out there available as snacks, they are not going to help them to top up on the nutrients, which is actually what they need to grow and develop well. So there's nothing that wrong with them, but they don't provide what children need, and you do need to be careful with some of them with the teeth. So hope that answers that question. Sorry, that was a very long-winded way of answering. Let's have a look. Is there any difference between the menus for babies and toddlers? I'll let you guys go with that.
So we average the three-week revolving menu for under 4-year-olds. So obviously it's up to the setting, to how much they give to each child. We also offer organic baby purees, so obviously they're very good that we can offer. We do a plain fruit, a plain veg, we do a meat and veg, and then we do a dinner puree as well, which are fantastic. So obviously they're welcome to those. As Charlotte said, we don't add any salt to our main meal, so they can be blitzed, brought down, whatever for the age group. So
perfect.
Yeah.
So you can use the menus that you've got and
adapt
them.
We have stretched on the menu the two or a couple of things that we'd say are not suitable for babies under 12 months. So then we have alternatives for those. So.
Yeah, and in terms of the puddings as well, there's always an option that if you don't want the bakes and the cakes, which some parents won't want to give to younger babies because they're just not used to having those kind of foods, you can just have fresh fruit as a pudding option as well if you want to. So there are menus for those children, there are recipes for those children, but they also can have the other Zebedees menus as well. So yeah. Perfect, let's have a look. What brands of yoghurt do Zebedees use? Do they contain sugar? Well, I kind of answered that one, didn't we? So Zebedees have their own brand ones that are just used with blended fruit, but we also do use other ones, but I don't actually know what the brand...
They're made for us.
They're made for you,
made to specification.
Yeah,
One comes in a pot for, and the others, a bigger, but it is all made to specification for us.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Yeah. Is plain fruit a good option for desserts? Yeah, so plain fruit could be... So desserts are offered because, as I said, throughout the day, we need to make sure that all children, however they normally eat and whatever they normally eat, have enough in the way of nutrients. So what we need to make sure that we are doing is we need to make sure that we are giving them plenty of opportunity to have calories and nutrients throughout the day. So for this reason, we do offer puddings. And fruit is absolutely fine pudding to give to young children. And depending on what age they are, they're always going to be wanting to have some fruit in their, some fruit as puddings in their diet. So yeah, I hope that makes sense. But yes, it's absolutely fine to give fruit, but also the puddings, the bakes, and the other things that are offered for Zebedees for older children are also absolutely fine too. Hope that helps to answer that question. Okay, we've got another question here. You mentioned hummus contains salt. Do Zebedees add salt to theirs?
No added salt to our own. Also, we make our own hummus, which is fantastic. So we know exactly what's in it. So there's no added salt in that at all. On its current menu, it's tomato, isn't it? Hummus.
Tomato hummus.
Yeah, it's obviously to flavour. And then on the new menu, we'll have another flavour. So.
Yeah, always experimenting with flavours, and you know, it's never just like the standard. I love the way it changes all the time, so that's brilliant. Why are there so little fish options on your menu? Well, this is a really good question. Who wants to do this one?
You may do that one.
So we always try. So we meet government recommendations for how much fish should be on the menu, and we have tried in the past to try and go above and beyond that. Because the government recommendations at the moment mean that fish needs to be on the menu something like once every 3 weeks. We make sure that we're offering an oily fish and a standard fish on the menu within the cycle each week. But we would like to add more. But every time we do get a lot of feedback from the nurseries that fish is not going down well with children. So it's one of the ones that we always get feedback on, isn't it? And unfortunately, we've had to adapt the menus to try and make sure that everybody is happy. But we are trying. We're experimenting with recipes. We're experimenting with different recipes with fish and different ways of offering fish. So I think at the moment we've got fish in the tea, which is a bit more of a popular way of serving it.
Once on the lunch, as you say, tuna and mackerel.
Yeah, so we are experimenting. We're trying it in different ways. We're bringing it into the tea. We're offering it in tea time rather than as the main meal. But we are trying, but we do often get feedback every time we put fish on the menu, don't we, that it's not being eaten as well. So that is such a great question, and I like that question, so thank you. Is it okay to give dried fruit with savoury items? I heard this neutralises the sugar. It doesn't neutralise the sugar. What it does is if you are offering something like dried fruit alongside another food, it actually can reduce the impact on the teeth. So that's probably what you've heard. Yes, dried fruit is not ideal to offer on its own or as a snack on its own to young children. And the reason for that is because it's basically fruit that's had the water taken out of it. So it's a very, very condensed form of fruit. It's of sugar. It's sticky and it's very sweet once it's had the water removed from it. And for that reason, it can get stuck around the teeth. So it's really important when you're offering, especially because dental health in the UK for under 5s is a bit of an issue. So especially when you're offering to young children, it's really, really important to make sure you're offering dried fruit alongside other foods. So something like yogurt, a glass of milk, one of the kind of tray bakes that we offer, anything like that will help to reduce the impact of the sugars on the teeth. So I hope that helps. And that's a really good question as well. Yeah, another one put through. What gravy does Zebedees use, and is gravy okay for toddlers? So I'll let you answer the gravy question about what Zebedees uses.
It's made to specification,
isn't
it? So
for us,
it contains
very
no
low
salt at all.
No salt?
Yeah. And we're only allowed to use it once a week as well, which we do.
Hence we only have 2 roasts on the 3-week cycle.
So we meet government standards with regards to how often we offer
there's no allergens
gravy
in the gravy also. There's no gluten, no soya.
That's good.
It works really well for everybody, really.
And we limit how much we offer it. Gravy generally is okay to offer to toddlers, but I would definitely be saying offer it to toddlers not all the time. So, make sure that we're not offering it really regularly because it can be very, very high in salt. But every now and then is fine. But when it comes to Zebedees, it's made to their specific specifications to make sure it's a low salt food. No allergens. So good. And we still limit how often it is on the menu too. So that's really good. Is there a reason you use yogurt a lot for puddings? Oh, that's a good question.
You go.
So on this menu cycle, it's obviously we have to get the dairy into a meal, as with what we have to offer the children. Yogurt is a very good alternative to use, hence for the dairy. We use a variety of yogurts, so some natural, some flavoured. On the new menu, which is coming out very shortly, you'll find a different, obviously we'll reduce the amount of yogurt because I understand the feedback about the yogurt has we will listen to the feedback really. So
Yeah.
On the new menu cycle there won't be as much yogurt.
Yeah, there's a lot more reduced. And as I said as well at the start, we're working really hard on those
with
yogurts.
Suppliers, etc.
With suppliers, we're trying to alter specifications, make sure we can get exactly what we need. But we've just really struggled over the last couple of years because of the supply. But we are really working hard on that, so we will. But definitely we've reduced the amount, and I think the Zebedees ones we've used a bit more on the menus as well. So let's have a look. Doesn't dairy in the main meal interfere with iron absorption? Yogurt could be as a snack instead of a pudding. So I can't answer the pudding snack question, but I can answer the dairy in the main meal. So adding dairy in the main meal every now and then is absolutely fine. Iron absorption isn't about one specific meal. It's about what children are eating over time. And one of the things that Zebedees do is really careful with making sure we're offering protein and iron-rich foods in their main meals. Just because you're adding dairy with one meal, it doesn't mean that is going to interfere with the absorption. It's much more about the amount of dairy versus the amount of iron and protein-rich foods over time. So it is not within an individual meal. And not all of Zebedees meals, of course, are served with dairy. Quite often the dairy is given afterwards as a pudding, but as we've already said, we have reduced the amount of yogurt on the menu. In terms of guidelines, we do have to make sure that we're offering enough dairy throughout the day to meet government guidelines. So we are offering the right amount of dairy, but we're trying not to go above that too much, and we have altered the next lot of menus. So hopefully that helps. But within a single meal, it's much more about what's happening and the iron intakes over time. If children are having huge intakes of dairy, it may displace iron in the diet, but it's unlikely to be within a single meal that is going to have a long-term impact. So I hope that helps to answer that question. But again, really good question. And actually, we've got 3 minutes to go, so I think we've done really, really well on time.
Thank you.
Thank you guys so much for being here. I love running this. I know it was a bit of a complex one. I think the last time it was a lot more general, and this was very specific advice on salt and sugar, but hopefully it helped to give you some thoughts and tips and advice and feedback. We really enjoy doing this. So if you guys have any feedback for us on what you'd like to hear, on whether you thought it was useful, on whether you've been able to roll out any of the ideas, or if you've got any more questions for these guys on the menus, please let us know, because we're always here to take your calls and questions and help answer them. So do come back to us, do let us know, and thank you very much. Do you want to let us know how we can reach you?
Yeah, so if you have further questions or anything, just email clientservices@zebedees.co.uk, and we can answer any questions or anything you may want to know.
Yeah,
thank you.
Perfect. Thank you guys so much, and I hope you enjoyed it. Bye.
Thank you.